Hey, everybody. I'm Jake Speck, Executive Director here at 80 Players in the George Theater, and welcome to Stories Start Here. I believe this is our fourth episode that we've done during the pandemic, where we're taking you guys backstage with us and telling you a little bit about the process of creating theater. We saw you last in December for our special Christmas-themed dueling pianos Stories Start Here, which was a lot of fun. This guy that's next to me is Wayne Kirkpatrick. He's our guest for tonight, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. But first, wanted to give you all a little update on all the things that we've got going on at the theater. What I have continued to refer to as my wife and I's blatant display of nepotism, our concert that we filmed at the theater, a spectacular evening of stories and songs, is still streaming. We extended it for a week. It was supposed to end today, but because of all the crazy week that we all experienced here in Houston last week, we have extended that to March 7th. So you can still buy a ticket to that at 80players.org. And then after that, we're going to be bringing you Gospel at the George, an Easter celebration with John Mark McGaha and Piper Jones. If you tuned into our virtual gala, you saw the two of them. John Mark was also on our Dueling Pianos event that we did here. That's going to be awesome. They're coming in from Nashville to film that on our stage. And then after that is our Metzler New Works Festival. I'm actually in my wife's closet right now because we wrapped filming last night on our first virtual play reading of the world premiere of Apollo 8. And I have this all set up, so I just decided to use it for our interview here tonight. But that's what we've got going on and coming up. But tonight, I'm so excited that Wayne Kirkpatrick is joining us from Nashville, Tennessee. That's a lovely painting of the Nashville skyline that's behind him. And Wayne, I'm gonna sort of pick out some parts of your bio and introduce you so everybody knows who it is that they're getting to hear from. I will say, folks, I've got several questions I'm going to ask Wayne, but you can also put your own questions into the Q&A, so please do that, and we'll be taking questions from there as well. But Wayne, a lot of people know Wayne as the Grammy Award winner of the Song of the Year that he wrote in 1996, Change the World, which was recorded by Babyface and Eric Clapton and won Song of the Year at the Grammys that year. Wayne has had over 200 songs recorded over the last 30 years. He wrote some of Amy Grant's biggest early hits, Every Heartbeat and Good For Me. He wrote Place in This World for Michael W. Smith. His songs have been recorded by Don Henley, Wynonna, Faith Hill, Trisha Yearwood, Tyler Hilton, Gabe Dixon, Tim McGraw, Martina McBride, Joe Cocker and the Wreckers, and a slightly moderately successful country artist named Garth Brooks, which recorded Wayne's song Wrapped Up in You. He has produced and written on 3 different albums with Little Big Town, which yielded the top 10 hits Boondocks, Bring It On Home, A Little More You, Little White Church. He's written singles for Bonnie Raitt. His songs have been featured in the films Almost Famous, Phenomenon, Bruce Almighty, on Grey's Anatomy, on True Blood, and the list goes on and on and on. I had forgotten, Wayne, that you wrote, until I read this bio, the song When You Act in Julie's Green Room on Netflix. I love that show and have watched it with my kids. If you have not seen Julie's Green Room, it's Julie Andrews. It's just a really charming show that teaches kids about theater. And Wayne wrote a song that was performed by Julie and Alec Baldwin on that show. But we're here tonight to talk about musicals. Wayne was the co-creator and co-composer and lyricist of the Broadway musical Something Rotten, which was nominated for 10 Tony Awards and experienced a very successful run on Broadway as well as a national tour, and has now had international productions. And he has also recently written the score and the music and the lyrics, excuse me, for Mrs. Doubtfire, the musical, which had just finished its 3rd preview on Broadway before the pandemic shutdown happened. So they're hoping to reopen that next year. My gosh, I know I left things out. He's in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. And something that I'd love to talk about if we have time too, is Wayne is a longtime game enthusiast, and he is co-writing, producing, directing a documentary about the history of board games, which is really fun. So my goodness, Wayne, I read your bio and you're one of those bios that I go, how on earth is this person friends with me? You have done so much. So welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, I thought we would dive right in and keep your questions coming if you got them. I see a couple of you have already chimed in. I just read, some of your bio, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how it was that you got into songwriting and how that became your career path?
Yeah, well, I kind of got into songwriting in high school. The summer before I moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is where I went to high school, um, I I didn't know anyone, and I sat in my room and taught myself to play guitar. And it was just before going into the ninth grade, and so as soon as I could change chords fast enough, I started writing songs, and it was kind of a way to express how I was feeling and also kind of discover how I was feeling about things. I was pretty uh, shy, introverted guy, and so that was a way for me to express myself. So I really found songwriting to be therapeutic, and I just loved it. So, and then by the my 10th grade year, I went to Baton Rouge High, which was a magnet school, and so they didn't have football teams or anything like that. They had, no team sports, and you had to choose a major, and I majored in theater. They had a great theater program. They had theater, they had music theater, they had uh, a full orchestra, jazz band. They had it was really focused on the arts, and so I really immersed myself in that, and that's where I first fell in love with theater, was in high school. And from that moment on, a kind of a blending of songwriting and music theater, and I just always felt like I wanted to write a musical at some point, even back then, even in high school. And but I kind of followed the songwriting route for a long time before I got back around to theater. But that was my early exposure to the world of theater, actually.
That's awesome. See, I didn't even know that, because that's one of my later questions for you was writing a musical something that you wanted to do from the get go. I'm going to take a couple of these questions here because they somewhat relate to what we're talking about right now. Someone wants to know what song you wrote that Gabe Dixon recorded.
Oh, there was a song called "Ever After You" that I wrote with him. There was another song called oh shoot, now I'm going to go blank. Um, uh, well, actually, just recently, I've written a few songs with Gabe, and we actually just wrote a song. We wrote a song several years ago called "Live Again," that was just recently recorded by Garth Brooks on his album that just came out. I haven't
Hmm.
even heard it yet, but anyway, a song called "Ever After You" was the first song that we wrote together, and I'm glad to hear that somebody is familiar with Gabe Dixon, because I just think he's awesome. He's incredible.
We had another guest who said, "Go BRHS Bulldogs." Shout out there to the. I'm assuming
Mhm.
that's the high school.
Yes, that is the high school, the Bulldogs.
Awesome. Okay, some of these other questions we're getting to them. Yes, and our Gabe Dixon fan said yes, he's phenomenal.
Yes, agreed.
Um, so I kind of asked you this, or you kind of covered this already, but my next question for you was, you had and this is another question that's in here too. Obviously, you had a really successful career as a songwriter for many years before you ever got to actually writing, the something rotten. Um, Someone asked, what was your first big break as a songwriter? So I'll throw that to you first.
Okay. My first big break. Um, I had a song recorded by an artist named Billy Sprague, who was a Christian artist,
Mhm.
and but the second, actually the second and third cuts that I got as a songwriter were on an Amy Grant album, which was her Unguarded album. If anybody's familiar with Amy's albums, and so
That's
I had.
huge. I mean, that was like breakthrough record for her, right?
Yeah, that was as she was kind of on the forefront of starting to do all the crossover
Mhm.
um, stuff, and I just happened to be around during that time in her career, and so I had a song called "Wise Up," and another song called Love of Another Kind that were on that album. And those were really kind of I mean, back then to have a song on an Amy Grant record was, you know, kind of a was the desire of any songwriter in town, regardless of whether or not it was Christian music or pop music or whatever, because she was, you know, a big selling artist at that time. So that really kind of paved the way for me. And anytime you get a cut on an album, it just kind of validates you in the eyes of other people as a legitimate songwriter, you know. So that's what it did for me, and just opened up a lot of doors after that.
Well, then, you know, I think as I've covered in your bio, you then went on to write Every Heartbeat, which is, I mean, one of the biggest hits she ever had.
Yeah, what happened was after on the Unguarded album, those were just songs that were pitched to Amy and that she recorded, but eventually we kind of developed a friendship and a collaboration partnership together, where we started writing songs together. And we would write songs for her record, and we wrote songs for Michael W. Smith, and so, you know, but we would collaborate often. And so by that time, by the time we got to Every Heartbeat, I mean, that when she was doing that the Heart in Motion album, which had Baby Baby on it, you know, I was just kind of right in the thick of all that was going on. And so I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate for her and with her on a lot of those songs.
That's awesome. So I said earlier, you know, did you always want to write a musical? And is that something you knew you were always going to do? And did you attempt to write a musical before Something Rotten? And what was sort of the process that led to that actually coming to fruition and happening?
I would say my first attempt at writing a musical was in high school. We had an assignment to write some, you know, and it was like maybe a 10-minute, 15-minute piece, and got together with some classmates, and we wrote a musical about two criminals that escaped from an insane asylum. No, escaped from prison, and as they were trying to escape from the police, they broke into an insane asylum, unbeknownst to them, and it was called Two Crooks and a Cracker Barrel, and it was a, you know, a comedic romp, you know, the wackiness that ensues from that plot. And so that was my first attempt. And then several years later, because my brother also went to Baton Rouge High after me, and when he got out of school, we collaborated together on a musical idea called Stages, which you know, had something to do. I can't even remember what it was about.
Had something to do with stages.
It had something to do with stages, the theater, and blah blah blah. And we and it was not very good, but that was our first attempt, and that, like, kind of fresh out of school. And but early on, we always talked about. I feel like that musical, Stages, I feel like it was written in a weekend. You know, that's what it feels like. I don't feel like we spent that much time on it. But we always talked about seriously wanting to write a musical. And actually, a little trivia tidbit: when we were doing when they were doing the set design for Something Rotten, and they had to put show posters up on the walls, we had them made. They made one of Stages.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And there was one other poster on there that was some show that Kevin McCullum, the producer, had been involved with back in his younger days. That's on the wall too. So anyway, but
that's fantastic. And we should say, do you want to say a few words about Carrie? Since you're obviously you guys wrote the show together. Wayne's brother, Carrie, they wrote that show together, and
right.
Carrie has had a pretty impressive career himself.
Yeah, he's Carrie went off to we lived together in Nashville for a time, and then he wanted to be an actor. He thought he did, so he was pursuing that, and he went down to Florida and worked at Epcot. He did regional theater down in, I think, Vero Beach and places like that. And then he ended up working at Epcot, doing street theater for Epcot, which is where he met Kevin McCullum, who was at the time performing in the Broadway Review show at Disney.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So that's where they first met. And then Carrie ended up.
We should say Kevin McCullum is the lead producer behind Something Rotten. Is that
Right,
the correct title? Yeah,
that's right. Yes, he's the lead producer. And Carrie ended up deciding he didn't want to be an actor and he wanted to be a screenwriter. So he went to California, went to USC, went to film school. And Kevin McCullum ended up at film school at USC too. So, which is where I met Kevin first, was through Carrie, back when they were living there. And then Kevin eventually left LA to pursue producing theater and ended up eventually in New York. And his first big production was Rent,
right.
Which me and Carrie went to a tech rehearsal of Rent back before it opened. I was back in '96.
Wow.
And so, but Carrie had also, by the time we had done that, Carrie had written James and the Giant Peach, and he had worked on Rescuers Down Under, and he was working as a screenwriter, and I was pursuing songwriting here in Nashville, and all through that, we always kind of dabbled in each other's business. We would occasionally write a song together, or we wrote a couple of screenplays together, and we would kind of bounce back and forth into each other's business. So and we would always talk about wanting to seriously write a musical. And so we would,
even back then, right? In what you're talking about in the late '90s. But I mean, you guys both had such great careers going. '96 was the same year that you won the Grammy Award for Song of the Year. Obviously, Carrie was writing, major animated feature films. So what was the thing that finally brought it all together that you guys said, okay, this is it, we're going to do it?
Well, we kept talking about it, and we would toss around ideas, several different ideas for what might be a good idea for a musical. And we would just, like, when we were together, like if I'd go out there to work, or if we were together over Thanksgiving or whatever, we'd go, and toss around ideas and maybe a 5-minute conversation. And the Something Rotten idea, which was, for a long time, we were just calling that Shakespeare musical, because we didn't have a title for it. And we would just throw ideas back and forth, like, hey, what if these two writers were, in the shadow of Shakespeare and trying to write a hit, and that might be something. And then, it usually followed by, oh, that could be funny, we should write that one day, and we kind of did that for a while. And actually we did that over a span of about 15 years. And at one point, I might be in New York and would go see some musicals, and then I'd call him and go, yeah, I really want to do this. Or he'd be in New York and he'd see something and he'd call me and he's like, yeah, we can do this. I want to do this, And at some point, when we went to see Rent, we were with Kevin McCullum, and Carrie said, me and Wayne are talking about, we have an idea for a musical. And Kevin, even back then, he said, I'd love to see what you guys come up with. So we had this open door to a Broadway producer in '96, and Kevin went on to produce many other musicals, Avenue Q, Drowsy Chaperone, In the Heights, so he was a Broadway producer, a bigwig at that point. So it was kind of like, we've got this open door. We would be foolish to not try to step through that. So then and at some point along the way, I remember sitting down. I was in LA, and I had been toying around with some music ideas along the way. And so when I was with him, I said, if we ever do write a musical, maybe something like this. And I played a few ideas I had. One of them being the song "Welcome to the Renaissance," which was maybe the only song that made it from the beginning of our journey to the end. But that was one, and his first reaction was, "Well, that doesn't sound like Sondheim," and 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 I said, "Well, we're not Sondheim, but we should just write what we know how to write." And so then the big question became, how do you pitch a musical? Do we have to write the whole thing? Do we, because in the world of commercial songwriting, you write a song, you demo it, and then you pitch it to, that's kind of the process. And it's like, so I just like, do we have to do that with musicals? Do we write the whole thing? So Carrie said, well, let's just call Kevin and ask him. And so he called Kevin and said, what do you need? And Kevin said, well, Avenue Q was 3 songs and an idea. In the Heights was a concept. And so we were like, well, we've got that. We've got an idea and we've got a few songs at this point. So can we pitch it to you? So that's kind of how it started. That was in December of 2010. So from 1996 until 2010, that's how long it took for us to actually pitch him the idea.
Wow. And even now in 96, did you already sort of have the Shakespeare idea? Was that a part of it yet?
It was in just very germ of an idea. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take a quick little question here from the Q&A. Someone asks, in songwriting, do you write the music or the lyrics first?
I would say, generally speaking, I tend to like to write lyrics from being inspired by music. So generally speaking, I would say the music comes first, or a title that is then adapted to a piece of music. And I've rarely been successful at putting music to an existing piece of poetry, basically. So
interesting. So this kind of parlays into one of my other questions for you, which I might sort of combine these into 2 questions, but into one question. So you've been successful writing songs across a lot of different genres, but obviously, like, writing a standalone song where sort of the entire narrative fits into the 3.5-minute song is very different than writing the score of an entire musical, where each song in the musical, is a part of the greater 2.5-hour long narrative.
Right.
So could you just talk a little bit about the process and how that's different?
Yeah, it is very different. And it took me a little while to kind of rethink the way I approached songwriting, because writing for a song for basically an album, you're writing for an audio experience. You record the song and you're just really concerned with how it's going to come out of the speakers, really. And with theater, you have to think visually, and sometimes just because a song works well coming through the speakers doesn't necessarily mean it's a good song for a theatrical experience. And sometimes listening to a song that's recorded that is a theatrical experience may not have as much of an impact as it does when you see it, when you see the song. So that was one thing that I had to learn and readjust. And also, the biggest thing is songs and musicals really need to move the story forward. And so to just sit in a song for 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes or however long it is, which can be done in theater and does happen occasionally, and successfully, but for the most part, the song is in service of a bigger piece. So it's either informing the audience about the character, or it does a lot of the heavy lifting of moving from point A to point B in the story, and it took me a while, and I still find myself, at the core of it, I feel like theater or any kind of music is, you're still looking for something that is catchy, I mean, for me, something that's catchy. So I think hooks are important in songs, theater or not, and uh, and melody is important, as well as what's awesome about theater is lyrics are so much more um, paid attention to. That, you know,
Yeah.
and it's great. It's also an added pressure because every line really counts, you know, because it's telling the story. So there was a learning curve though, and it took us from the time that Kevin got on board with Something Rotten, which was, it was still you know, formulating in a lot of its, we had a rough outline and we had the characters, but there was still a long way to go in development. So a lot of the early songs that were being written were kind of written in a vacuum because we didn't have all the stories. So it might just be, hey, Shakespeare needs a song. So what about a song where he's singing about all the words that he came up with, you know? And it's like, well, I mean, write a whole song, but once you get the story all fleshed out, it's like, well, that song has no place in this musical, you know, so you're tossing it out. So that process, it took us about 4.5 years from the time we started seriously writing the musical till the time that it opened. And we wrote over 50 songs
Wow.
in one form or another, some full songs, some just half-baked ideas or whatever, but 52 songs, something like that. And that was exhausting.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
It'd be so fun. It'd be so interesting to hear some of those, that the ones that didn't make it.
Well, you know, funny you should say that, because after the show was running for, I don't know, maybe it might have even been a year, we did you're familiar with 54 Below in New
Yeah,
York?
sure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so that club in the basement of Studio 54, and we did a show, an evening of cut songs from Something Rotten, and it was called Something Really Rotten. And, we had so many songs. The joke was we had to cut songs from a night of cut songs for that show. But it's on YouTube in some like poorly filmed version. You know, someone in the audience filming
Oh,
it.
that's awesome. I'll have to check
But
that out.
yeah, there's a lot of those cut songs are in there, and some of them were hard to let go of, actually.
Oh, I bet. I'm
Yeah.
sure they're great. It's interesting. I remember hearing an interview with Harry Connick Jr. once, and he wrote a musical called Thou Shalt Not, that didn't last very long on Broadway several years ago. And Susan Stroman directed it, and he had not written a musical before. And he was saying the first time that she gave him a note was like, "Yeah, that song doesn't work." He was like, "What? Wait, what? What are you talking about? I wrote
Yeah.
the song. Let's use it." And that was like just a whole new world to him.
You know, it took me a while to get used to, because we'd be in meetings with Casey Nicolau, the director, and you know, in the early stages of writing the musical, there might be, you know, the book wasn't completely written yet, but there might be something in there that would say, and then a song goes here, you know, and it might have the title of the song. But he would say that a lot of times. He would say that song doesn't work, and it took me a while to realize that he wasn't necessarily talking about the song as much as he was talking about just the idea of that idea right there is not the right idea for right there, or that's not moving the story the way it needs to go, or whatever, you know, because it was hard early on to just, when any comment was made about a song, it's like, oh wow, he hates these songs. He's, you know, I'm horrible. I shouldn't even be here, you know.
Well, and you have to learn how to speak each other's language, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I believe you told me a story that when you were trying to describe Welcome to the Renaissance to Casey, you said it's kind of got a Penny Lane type feel, and he was like, "What do you? I don't know what Penny Lane is."
Yes. Yeah. When that song was first presented to him, it was just a piano vocal, and I do demos of everything, but it was a really scaled down piano vocal. And he said, "Oh, he said, I like that song, but it's just kind of strolly." He doesn't really like strolly songs, and he said it's too laid back. And I said, "Well, no," I said, "just think, we can bump the tempo up a little bit." I said, "But you know, it's going to have drums and bass and all this, and just think of it kind of like Penny Lane, you know." And he's like, "What's that?" And I said, "You know, Penny Lane, the Beatles." He's like, "No, I don't know." It's like, ah, okay.
We're not in
Note to
Kansas
self.
anymore.
Yeah, note to self, don't use the Beatles as a reference. Stay in the theater world. Yeah. With
So
him.
that kind of segues perfectly into my next question, which is, so stylistically, like the music in Something Rotten, there are some fun, really rock inspired songs that Shakespeare does, but a lot of the score is, it's really kind of classic Broadway show tunes, which is a very different style than anything else that you wrote prior that at least is out there that I'm familiar with. And
Right.
was that a learning curve for you, or have you just been secretly writing show tunes for decades that we've just never heard,
Um,
or how did that?
Actually, kind of. I mean, it was not. It was a part of me that that was in me. There was just no outlet for that really in the formats that I was working in. Um, but you know, the traditional aspect of it, just drawing from a lot of the stuff that I grew up listening to, and was familiar with, and just trying to emulate that or mimic that. And fortunately, too, the type of show that we were doing, it really called for that. You know,
Sure,
you're really wanting to reference all of these old classic uh, musicals, numbers, and all that. So yeah, and actually with the exception of Welcome to the Renaissance, some of the like the rock numbers that Shakespeare did, those came in a later incarnation. So early
hmm.
on, even some of the Shakespeare number, like the song I was telling you about that we wrote first for that, was really more in a traditional um, musical form. And then as the character of Shakespeare developed, when we decided, he needs to be like a rock star and treated like a rock star, and so maybe his songs should have more of a rock edge to them, and then which led to he's doing a concert in the park and doing his greatest hits, and so that it changed along the way to allow us to actually put some more pop elements into the score. So I'm
That's
not the
awesome.
answer to your question, but
No, absolutely. And for those of you who have not seen the show or don't know the show, you should go check out the cast recording. You can hear what Wayne's talking about. But it's a great score, and it's a very, what you said earlier, I think hooks are important. That might be where you and Mr. Sondheim might disagree. Uh,
yeah.
but I love
Humble.
not only Something Rotten, but so all of the songs that you've written are so they're so memorable and they're so catchy, and I mean that as a huge compliment.
Thank
They're
you.
very hummable, and you walk out of the theater and you remember those melodies. Could take a couple of questions here. Someone asked, do you have a process or daily routine where you allot time for writing even when you don't feel particularly inspired, excuse me, or how do songs come to you?
Well, kind of yes and no. I've learned through the years. I mean, I've been writing songs for over 30 years, and I used to get into panic mode if I couldn't come up with something, and I think, oh, I just wrote my last song last week, and that's it, I'm done, you know. But I've also kind of discovered that not every day is an inspired day, um, and I don't force it unless there are deadlines, and things like that you're dealing with. But so I don't say that I don't have a 9 to 5 type of schedule where I go in um, and make myself write all the time. But I would say, fortunately, I feel like I'm kind of writing all the time anyway. It's kind of a natural, whether I'm sitting at a piano or a guitar or in my studio, or if I'm just driving in my car, I feel like there's always something stewing. So, and sometimes you just kind of have to, or I have to just let it stew for a little bit. And then when I sit down, it kind of all comes out, when it needs to. So I think when I'll start to really worry, is when I just do that, when I don't feel the natural tendency to do that, So but I do go uh, to my studio, my writing space a lot, and I may not even pick up a guitar or sit at the piano or something. I may do something completely different. And then some days I feel really inspired, and I get after it then,
Awesome. Well, that segues into another question I've got here, which someone writes, do you prefer to co-write or to write on your own?
I prefer a balance of both. Um, there's something about the collaborative process that really helps you go to places that you wouldn't naturally go on your own. So having the influence of another person helps you broaden your horizons, a lot. But then there are also some songs that I feel like, oh, I've kind of got an idea or a vision for what this should be and needs to say, and it would be harder to bring somebody in to get on the same wavelength, that it might just be easier to just do it myself, so I wouldn't like to do a lot of either one without the other, I think.
Yeah, it's a good answer.
I can't imagine writing a musical by myself.
Well, I mean, theater is one of the most collaborative of all, art forms, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, and I think our buddy Douglas Waterbury Teeman is on here as well, and he's written a new musical that he wrote the book, music, and lyrics for, which just kind of blows my mind. Like,
And that's admirable. And sometimes I think, okay, well, I've got this idea, and maybe I'll just chase it and do it all by myself. But then I just go, man, that seems like really hard and lonely. So hats off to anyone that can do that. Yeah.
So someone has asked, when you've written songs that you've written that have become huge hits for these artists, do you have a sixth sense that tells you like this song is going to be a big hit, or have you been surprised by that every time?
I've been surprised. I've been surprised either way. You might have something and go, oh, we really nailed it with this one. This is it. And then it just, dies a cold, lonely death, and then others are kind of sneak up on you, and, kind of something happens to them that you can't imagine would have ever happened. So I kind of quit predicting one way or another, or quit expecting. I had enough people early on, someone would say, oh, this song is going to be a hit. It's going to be, and then it never does. So then after a while, you just kind of get used to, well, I'll believe it when I see it,
Sure.
I mean, I actually felt that way the first time I heard Change the World. I heard the final recording, and I just thought, that sounds really great. Babyface did an incredible job. Eric Clapton did a incredible job. It sounded great. I was like, I don't know if I can hear that on the radio, but because I just couldn't imagine that kind of that landing on the radio, but then it did. So what do I know? I just write them, and the best.
That's great. So somebody mentioned, and they're exactly right. They said that the number, it's a musical, or a musical and something rotten, got a standing ovation in the middle of the show when they saw it, and that they had never seen that happen before. I'm trying to think if I had seen. So I got to see Something Rotten twice. I saw the original Broadway production twice, and that number got a standing ovation in the middle of the show both times I was there. And I agree with her. I'm not sure I've ever seen that happen in another Broadway theater before. And what's interesting about it is that you'd almost equate that to an 11 o'clock number, which is the sort of the theater phrase we use for that big song that comes at 11 o'clock. So it's usually towards the end of the show. And not that there's when you go into the whole omelet musical, that's a bit of an 11 o'clock number on its own. But the 11 o'clock number in Something Rotten comes sort of midway through the first act. But it was,
were concerned about that.
But it was really, I mean, again, like, I don't think I've ever seen that, where a standing ovation in the middle of the first act. I mean, were you were you sort of surprised by that? Were you stunned by that?
Oh yeah. We did when we started doing after we'd been through the rehearsals and we were in the theater and we started doing the show in front of you have your invited dress and our friends and family come and see it, and there were like 2 or 3 shows before we actually opened the first night of previews even. And and it happened the first night and then the second night and the third, and it was like every night it was like, okay, well, these are just friends and family, so they're just being nice, and have been supportive, and then it kept happening. And it was really surprising. um uh and then there was a little bit of is it all kind of downhill from here? Because how do you top this moment? And but I think what once we got used to it, and it wasn't like it would either have a standing ovation or it would have multiple waves of applause, and it became this thing that everybody just kind of counted on. At one point, you kind of get spoiled by it, And but what it ended up really doing was, if you were the show, it takes a minute for you to figure out what you just got yourself into, you know, because it's got its own kind of silly humor, and it's broad and um, somewhat juvenile at times. And so what happens if you're sitting there for the first 15 minutes or so and scratching your head, and what is it? By the time it gets to a musical, you're on board. It's like, okay, now I get it. Now I get it. So that's what I see it as what it's doing. It's like, uh, here's what you're in for, and here's where we're going, and here's where the humor is. And you know, you might choose to leave now or come with us on the ride, because there's going to be a lot more of this,
Well, and the people who have bought a ticket to Something Rotten should be the demographic that loves Broadway musicals, loves musical comedy, and that whole number is just a love letter to musicals. And so, I remember just grinning from ear to ear and even being emotionally moved by it, just because, that's why I grew up as a total musical theater nerd, and that's everything that I love, and picking out all the references. And so I think you sort of have your target audience that's delivered, and by the end of it, everybody's just so excited that they just jump to their feet.
Yeah, and you know what else we found out was, because it is for anyone who loves and knows a lot of music theater, they're going to get a lot of the references. But what we also started getting comments from is that it was also became something for people that didn't like theater, because it was a love letter to theater, and it also poked fun at theater.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
whichever side of the fence you were on, so people that would drag their significant other to the theater to see it, that they didn't want to go to a musical, there was something for them in that too.
And I love that it's that constant acknowledgement throughout the show of how, that even the concept of a musical is a little silly. It just is.
Yeah. And we're going, we know, we get it.
Yeah.
People just burst into song, from nowhere, and like, why aren't they talking? We get it. We felt that way too. As much as we love theater, sometimes we're going, why aren't they just talking? Why aren't they, So we make fun of all of it, and we make fun of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
But also have a reverence for it. It all comes from a place of reverence. So it's kind of like, you can't make fun of my brother, but I can.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. We can make fun of it because we love it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, it's already 7:15. Okay, so I want to make sure we get to, I'm going to skip over a couple of questions here. I want to make sure we get to Mrs. Doubtfire. So, I guess tell us a little bit about that process. So I know, you finally wrote the musical with Something Rotten. It was incredibly successful. And then, turned around and wrote Mrs. Doubtfire pretty quickly thereafter. So how did that become the sophomore, how did that become the follow-up Just, let us know how that
Yeah.
all came about.
Well, same producer, Kevin McCullum. He was teamed up with at the time it was Fox Theatricals, eventually, which got bought up by Disney. But uh, he approached us to see if we would be interested in working on it. And we, adapting a movie, especially a beloved movie like Doubtfire is, or any movie. We had been approached of several of different other movie titles that we just said no. At one point, Casey Nicolau, who was working on at one point was working on Tootsie, and asked us if hey, maybe you guys might be good, because they were having trouble with it or something. It's like, would you guys be interested in writing Tootsie? And we were like, no, that is like a flawless film, and I don't know how. And the big question that you ask, or that we would ask about adapting a film to theater, is the first big question is, does it sing? And why would this be a theatrical production? That's the question you have to answer. And if we can't see that, then we have no business writing it. Somebody else can see a way in. So anyway, when Doubtfire when we were approached with that, it was like, that the core of that story is about a father who would do anything to be with his kids. That's the story. It's not about a man dressing up like a nanny. It's not, it's about a father who would do anything to be with his kids. And we were like, I can get behind that. I understand that, And so, but we had to go through the process. We had to write a treatment, and we put the same team together. So it was me and my brother, and then John O'Farrell, who was the third writer on Something Rotten. And we knocked ideas around. We came up with the treatment, and we submitted that to them, to the producers. And then they wanted to hear some songs. So we had to come up with a few song ideas, and we did that. And it was a bit of an interview process. And they actually came to our 54 Below show because they needed to know, the other producers, the Fox producers, needed to know that we could write songs that had heart, not just silly song, And
Sure.
So, and in playing some of the cut songs that we had, that did show some of that. And bit by bit, we convinced them that we would be the right team for it. I hope they still feel that way, because it's
well, they're pretty bought in at this point. So
yeah. And then we just developed, and then we went through the process of finding the right director. We interviewed a lot of directors. Once it was determined that we would be the writing team, then we started to try to find the right director for it, and write music director and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it really it was such a different process from writing Something Rotten, because we had source material. With Something Rotten, it was like we were making it all up, and if we hit a dead end on the story, you got nothing to refer to see, where this thing ends up, where this goes. But with Doubtfire, we had a roadmap. So then it was just really more of a challenge of, how do we make this a theatrical event, and what nuggets from the story could we mine, to expound on. And what happened in Mrs. Doubtfire is we actually found a lot of deleted scenes from Mrs. Doubtfire.
wow.
And when you watch the movie and some of the deleted scenes, that the director made a choice to either not get so heavy. Like, there were a lot of scenes between the daughter, the oldest daughter, and the Daniel, Mrs. Doubtfire, and dealing with kids of divorce, and things like that, which they chose not to delve into as much, and just to give Robin Williams more of a platform to do all of his stuff. But we found some of those scenes and those elements really moving, and we actually wrote a song from a deleted scene in the movie. That's a scene between the daughter and the father, so we were able to delve into that a little more, which, and it kind of helps make it its own thing for the theater.
So will there be a third Kirkpatrick Brothers musical?
I think so. I think
Do
so.
are you guys tossing around ideas on that
Yeah.
yet, or are you just focusing on getting Doubtfire finally up and going?
Well, yeah. No, we're of course we found ourselves with some extra time on our hands to talk about things other than Doubtfire. So yeah, we have a few things that we toss around, and we definitely have been bitten by the theater bug, and we want to do it as long as someone will let us keep doing it. I mean, I really do love it. I love it, and it's become kind of my primary focus these days. Um, so I hope to do a lot more of it.
All right, I'm going to go back to a couple other questions here. So someone asked, when you were workshopping something rotten, was there a memory that stands out to you that happened, something that was unexpected or wonderful?
Um, well, there were a lot of things learning, developing the characters, and one thing that sticks out to me when we were in the workshop, Christian Borle, who played Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting in the back of the room, and they were running some scene, and then he came and sat down next to me, and he said, "Do you realize how special this is?" He was talking about the group that had been assembled to do this workshop, which most of them ended up being in the original cast. But he's and he was pointing out to me that this doesn't happen all the time. I knew nothing. I knew nothing but he said, "Do you realize how special this is?" And I said, I said, "No, I don't, because I've never done this before. But something does tell me that we are being spoiled."
Yeah.
Because it was such an incredible uh, group of actors and creative team that was assembled for that you could just feel the just kind of the magic, the energy. Everyone was having a good time, which, come to find out, that doesn't always happen in workshops. I didn't know
No,
that.
I've been a part of some where nobody
Yeah,
had a good time.
I've heard stories since then, but so our first induction into it was such a joyous room to be in, and with people that were genuinely enjoying being there and being a part of the workshop and contributing to it and helping develop the characters, that it was just that was something that stuck with me, and that I tried to treasure, because of anticipating that would not always be the case. I will say it's an equally joyous experience on Mrs. Doubtfire too. So I feel like I've won the lottery twice in terms of the workshopping experience. So I just can't
Awesome.
imagine. I can't imagine theater not being joyous. But I know it's not. I know it's, there are times when it's not working out.
It should be, though.
Yeah.
It should be, because if it's not fun, then why are we doing it?
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Christian Borle, the actor he's talking about, went on to win the Tony Award for Best
Yeah.
Actor in a Musical for his performance as Shakespeare in Something Rotten.
Yes.
He's phenomenally talented actor and singer. So, do you have a favorite musical? And you can't say one of the ones that you've written.
One of the two I've written. Yeah. You know, I go back and forth between a few, but I've always loved Music Man.
That's my favorite musical.
Is it really?
It is, yeah, absolutely. I always tell people there's a difference between what's my favorite musical or what do I think is the best musical ever written. But my answer to my favorite musical is The Music Man every time.
Yeah. I tend to judge musicals based on how much I love the songs.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the story was falling apart, it's like, yeah, but there's great song. That's not the case in The Music Man. And have you read Meredith Willson's book about?
No, I haven't.
Man, you should read that if Music Man is your favorite book. So these favorite musical, there's a book that Meredith Willson wrote called I think it's called But He Didn't Know the Territory.
Huh.
and it's his story of how Music Man came to be. It's
Oh,
fascinating,
wow.
and it's written in his kind of homespun language that he taught. It's just great. You should read that. And but I also love Chicago.
Mhm.
I just love the treatment of the way that they tell that story and treat it as a big extravaganza. It's a murder trial, but the way they treat it is like it's one big show, and the statement that makes. And then I just think the songs are incredible in that musical. So that's another
Yeah.
favorite of mine. Yeah.
So real quickly, we only have 5 minutes left, but um, it's so interesting to me that you do all these things. You're writing all these songs, you're writing all these musicals, and then on the side, and because I follow you on social media too, you're a total board game fanatic. And Wayne actually makes clocks. He makes these really cool clocks out of board games. And now you're actually producing a documentary about the history of board games. So give us a little bit on that, and how did making clocks come about, and when can we expect to see the documentary?
Well, that's a good question. But yeah, I've always dabbled in like doing artwork, and I painted for a while, and and then worked with metal and did but I kind of stumbled on this thing of I'm very much into the artisan kind of repurposed materials kind of um art projects, and I just I see people making clocks out of whatever old engines, or or make lamps out of vacuum cleaners and things like that. So I just thought, what could I make a clock out of? And I took an old board game, an old Monopoly game, and I built a frame, and I covered the frame with the Monopoly money, and then I made a pendulum out of the boardwalk deed, and I just thought, oh, that's kind of fun and whimsical. What else can I make? And then I made one out of Twister, and I just kind of got into it. And then it was just a hobby that kind of got out of control, really. And it kind of led to me finding a lot of old vintage or antique board games from the 1800s and early 1900s. And I made so many of them that I decided to participate in an artisan festival and set up a booth, and started selling them. And what I would do is, because I love history, I just wanted to attach a piece of history about the piece to them, and it started making me think that these brand names like Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley or Selchow and Ryder and all these, it's like before these were brand names, they were people, and who were these people, and who invented these games that have been on my shelves? Who invented Monopoly? Who invented Clue? How did they come up with that? And so that led to there's not really a lot out there, certainly not any sort of comprehensive overall history of board games, in that form. So with a friend of mine who said we should just make one. He's a filmmaker, and so that kind of led into a continuation of my hobby that got out of control, just starting to look into trying to make a documentary about the history of board games. And the positive thing about the shutdown of the musicals, I've spent this past year deep diving into a lot of research and making a lot of contacts with a lot of different people in that world. I interviewed the guy that invented Twister. I interviewed the guy that invented the game of life. He was 96 years old.
Wow.
Um, and I've just recently talked with the daughter of the man that invented Clue, and she's in her 80s now or something.
Wow.
But so anyway, it's been a great I don't know how long it'll take to get it. This will be a multi-episode documentary, and we're just trying to get the first one made. And you got to get the funding in place and all that, and
Sure.
we've paid for a lot of it ourselves so far. But we're just kind of doing it and if you build it, they will come kind of model. And so,
Well, and another silver lining for, during the pandemic, it's been a big year for board games. There's been a lot of people sitting at home playing them.
some of these friends, I've made friends with a guy who's the president of one of the biggest independent game companies in the country. And his sales over the past year have like tripled, games and puzzles. That's the business to be in this past year. Yeah.
Okay, folks. Well, it is 7:30. I'm gonna throw you one last question that somebody just asked. I think it's a good one to to end on. My gosh. Someone asked, do you have any other dream projects that you've got out there that you're just dying to do that you haven't gotten to do yet?
Nothing other than, well, those that I need to fulfill those dreams first before I add some more to my plate. But really seeing the documentary through, and then also just more musicals. That would be my dream projects at this point.
Awesome. Well, I know we would all like to see and hear more musicals from you as well. So
thank you.
Anyway, everybody, thanks so much for being here tonight. As you can see, Wayne is not only an incredibly talented guy, but he's also an incredibly kind and generous and humble guy. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight, Wayne. Thank you so much for being here. You all take care. Please stay in touch and go to adplayers.org where you can find out about all the stuff that we're doing. We'll have another story start here, I think, in a couple of months, where we're taking a deep dive into the technical side of theater and design. So that's going to be really exciting as well. And you can always give on our website too. These are free events, but we do have a third of our staff that's furloughed right now due to the pandemic. So if you'd like to make a tax-deductible gift, you can always do that at adplayers.org. And with that, we will call it a night. Thank you so much for being here. Wayne, take care. And thank you again.
All right.
Good night, everybody.